All right, here we go. It is That Betting Show on 610 Sports Radio, presented by Hollywood Casino. Normally, for those of you that are watching here on the video stream, it's the first time we've done the show on video, but with Kansas State basketball going on tonight as the Wildcats are getting set to take on Iowa State up in Ames, Iowa. We can talk betting angles with that as well. That is on 610 Sports Radio. Pre-game coverage starts at 7, so right now. But normally, That Betting Show airs live from 7 to 8. So if this is your first time checking out That Betting Show, appreciate it. Tune in on Wednesday nights to 610 when we're live. You can also check out part of the show on the Odyssey app, anywhere you get your podcast as well. So appreciate that. But we'll do this a little bit differently tonight. First time doing a video stream. Going to try it out a little bit. Welcome your interaction on Twitter at Alex Gould, at 610 Sports KC. And those of you watching on Twitch, I see Legends of Sacks on there as well. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. We'll try to do this, and if it goes well, maybe we'll add a video component going forward. I am going to be joined by PJ Glasser of BETQL coming up a little bit later on tonight. I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so. So that's going to be good. But I want to talk a lot about Chiefs and Ravens. And when you head out to Hollywood Casino, hopefully, what kind of bets that you should be making, or at least bets if you want to fade or follow, that's your decision. Last week on our Goldilocks, we went 2-2 Goldilocks, but we did really well on our prop bets, which saved the weekend. So if you followed some of our prop picks, in particular, this guy behind me, if you're watching and you're not listening back to the podcast, and you're watching on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, whatever, you might see the Pacheco jersey behind me. That guy saved the day for us from a betting perspective. One of my favorite bets last week was the over 14.5 rush attempts for Pacheco. And if you were on that, you know exactly what happened. You know what we needed. That final carry for Isaiah Pacheco to seal the deal for the Chiefs was the difference, got us our over 15.5. So save the day there. Let me know what you guys are betting for this conference championship weekend. Maybe you got some bets tonight. I guess you can still text in if you want. I can pull up the text stream back at the station as well, 913-586-7610. But otherwise, just hit me up on whatever platform you're at. I should be able to see all of that here. And so bear with me as we try to get this going. But let's start talking betting. Let's get into it and take a look at this Chiefs-Ravens game. And the consensus line, for the most part, the Chiefs are 3.5-point underdogs. And there's a few books out there. If you're someone that's looking to back the Chiefs, there's 2 books. Only one that's actually available to bet in the state of Kansas via mobile app. But 2 books still have 4 on the board. Now, there's a little more juice to it, but you can see that the Chiefs are 3.5-point favorites just about at every book except for one. I believe it's PointsBet / Fanatics does have a 4 still on the board. So if you have that app already and you've maybe got money already in your PointsBet account and you're thinking about backing the Chiefs this week, that's the only spot in Kansas, at least, that has a 4 on the board. I guess there's a chance we could see a 4 pop back up once we get more information on these injuries, because that is, to me, the story and why I have not made my bet yet for the Chiefs at plus 3.5. Because I want to see where this line is going to go, and I want to find out about Willie Gay and Joe Thuney and their injury status. And for those of you that may have listened to Cody and Gold, myself and Cody Tapp, as we do middays here at 610, you know during our show we had press conferences from Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones and others. And at that point in time, not surprisingly, Andy mentioned that Joe Thuney wasn't going to practice. He's dealing with the pec strain. But shortly after that, you had the news that from Adam Schefter that Joe Thuney, according to a source of his, unlikely to play, even though he's going to give it his all. And, you know, he's the guy that played with a broken hand, and so you never want to count out Joe Thuney. So there's the Thuney element that I think you have to consider when you're looking at betting this game. Then there is also the Willie Gay injury, where I don't know if Andy just forgot to mention his name or what, but at the press conference, he didn't list Willie Gay as a player that wasn't going to practice. And then there was a media portion that people didn't see them, and he ended up being, limited in this practice. Actually, I guess I can give you the official injury from practice today. I can pull it up and make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to that. But Willie Gay, L'Jarius Sneed, and Blaine Gabbert, oddly enough, were limited in practice today. So that's where I'm at on the betting spread-wise. I want to see how that impacts potentially some props for Lamar Jackson. We know Willie Gay is really the spy for this team. So mobility, when we get to a Lamar Jackson prop later, a lot of that is going to depend on, I think, whether or not you know or feel confident that Willie Gay Jr. is going to play. My favorite bet when we're talking spread and total, I'll just give it to you right now, is actually going to be the under for this game. 44.5 is where this thing sits. It's no secret. These are 2 of the top defenses in football. Number 1, number 2, both teams averaging one for 17 points per game, the other 16 points per game given up. So there's no doubt that the defense is going to be the story of this game. I do think it's a lower scoring game. I would be surprised if either team got to 27 or 30. I know the Chiefs just scored 27 on Buffalo, but I just think both these defenses are going to be the story of it, and why I like the under 44.5. I could see it being a 17-20 type of game. So that's a total that I'm going to be playing. I can tell you, I already made that bet, 44.5. If you want to shop around and wait, maybe you think you see a 45 at some point in time. I'm just going through and thinking about the game script for this one. And we know what this Chiefs defense does in the second half. And since week 14, they have not given up more than 7 points in the second half. And that 7 points they did give up to Buffalo. And we all know the defense, when it counted and when it mattered most, came up with those stops. So whether or not this offense gets rolling and looks like the old offense, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen either. So you couple the Chiefs' offensive struggles still, I believe, at times in the red zone, despite how we all feel probably better about this offense. You add in the Chiefs' defense, and then they're going up against the best defense statistically in football. I know here in Kansas City, we all believe the Chiefs are the best defense, and there's a big argument to be made that they are. But the Ravens, in a couple metrics, certainly are the number one defense. And so you add all that together, and I believe the under is the play for this game. Again, feel free to fade or follow, as I always tell you guys, and you can tweet at me and show me your wins and tickets, and also those of you that are in our betting Discord channel. So if you want to join the Discord channel as well, just hit me up on social media at Alex Gold. It's a free KC betting group that we have. People talk about their favorite bets, including tonight, as I mentioned, K-State, Iowa State. That game gets going here in less than an hour over on 610 Sports Radio, and that's why we're not broadcasting on 610 tonight, and we're trying something a little bit different. So, okay, that's total spread a little bit. The injuries, as I said, something that we got to watch. The other part here is going to be some prop bets that I like in this game. Let's start with the Chiefs. Noah Gray is one bet that I will be making this weekend. His yardage total, you might have already done a little shopping around and saw his prop bets and his yardage over 10.5 receiving yards. So he's gone over that number 12 times. Noah Gray goes over that number 12 times. 3 of the last 4 games he's gone over, and that 4th game was actually the Week 18 game that he didn't. So if you're adding, that's including the Week 18 game where the starters weren't playing. Blaine Gabbert was the quarterback. So it's a very, very low number for Noah Gray. Now, you're not going to get 4 or 5 targets. It's going to have to happen on maybe 2 targets or 3 targets. But typically when Noah Gray does catch the football, it's usually for 7+, 10+ yards. It's something that is a positive play for this football team. And I believe Noah Gray, when the number is that low, it's one that I'm willing to put a little sprinkle on, a few bucks on. So Noah Gray, if you're wanting some more information on that, only more than 3 targets twice this season. So if you're concerned about that, that would be the one part we have to caution ourselves on when we're thinking about that bet. But it is a bet that I will be playing. Another Chiefs prop bet for Chiefs in Baltimore this Sunday afternoon up in Baltimore is going to be Isaiah Pacheco. Not his rushing attempt. I'm not going back to the well. Last week, if you listen, you know we went over 14.5 rushing attempts. Cash that. Not going to go with rushing attempts, although it's sitting at 14.5 again. And look, I think there's a decent chance he gets over 15. I'm a little more concerned this week about him guaranteeing 15 carries. What if the Baltimore Ravens and that really strong defensive front shuts down the run this week? Joe Thuney injury, as I mentioned, Nick Allegretti is going to start. So what happens there if Nick Allegretti has to start and it's not Joe Thuney? So I'm staying away from rush attempts, but I do like the combination of rushing yards and receiving yards for Isaiah Pacheco. 86.5. This has been bet up already. I believe it opened at 80.5 rushing, receiving yards, the combo. 86.5 seems to be the consensus number. As always, though, shop around. You want to shop at ESPN Bet, go for it. FanDuel, DraftKings, whoever you like betting with. And obviously, if you go out to Hollywood Casino, you can check things out at the kiosk there and figure out where the numbers are at. And I encourage you to do that and check out the book. But that is another prop bet that I like. Pacheco's got over 6 of his past 7 games. So that's an area I think that is viable for this particular game. And then, and this one might scare some of you off. I haven't gone to a bet with this player probably since October. And that's going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling over 15.5 receiving yards. Look, I think there's something to be said for confidence. And last year in the AFC title game, we know what Marquez did. He stepped up when they were throwing Marcus Kemp out there. So I am actually going to bet Marquez Valdes-Scantling over receiving yards. He's gone over it 10 times this year, 4 of the last 7 games. As bad of a season as it's been, this is a number that he has gone over plenty throughout the year. I think if there's anything that could happen with his performance last week, I know it scares all of us, but he might end up with an extra target or two just based off of last week's performance. And when he does get targeted, usually it's down the field. Usually it's 15-plus yards down the field. That's what both of the catches were this past week against Buffalo. So I'm not telling you he's going to have 4 catches for 80 yards necessarily, but we're talking about 15 and a half receiving yards. It's 1 catch, and I know we have said that time and time this year, but I think there is a difference come playoff time, and he's got some confidence. Maybe Mahomes has some extra confidence in him as well, so we'll see. I know that might scare some of you. I see Remy in our chat over on Twitch. He says, ride the hot hand. Butterfly says, whoa, he's going to blow past the 86 and a half, going back to our Pacheco bet. I see Spec says favorite bet this weekend, Chiefs alt line -3. I don't know what's the juice on that. What are we talking? Is that plus? Let me guess. What was that, like plus 285, something like that? Maybe it's more than that for the Chiefs alt line -3 if you're feeling really confident. And you guys know we've had Spec on the show before, and he's kind of doubted the team a little bit. If he's feeling good, I don't know if that makes you fade the other direction, or maybe that's all you need to hear to lean towards the alt line. So those are 3 Chiefs props that I like. And again, I'm going to be joined by PJ Glasser of BETQL here in about 5 minutes or so and get a national perspective, get out of Kansas City for a second and see how are they viewing the Chiefs and Ravens. And then we got a massive game that hopefully we all still care about in the NFC title game after the Chiefs take on the Ravens. Otherwise, maybe we won't care about the game if the Chiefs lose. But 49ers, 7-point favorites against the Detroit Lions. I'll get into that game with PJ Glasser. On the Ravens side, here are 3 or 4 props that I'm keeping an eye on. I've only bet one of these. Let's start on the defensive side. And it goes back to this injury with Joe Thuney. And I do think it's an area you have to attack when you're thinking about betting. You know, if he does not play, well, then who's matching up with Allegretti? Well, a guy that had 13 and a half sacks for the Baltimore Ravens, and Justin Madubuike, plus 150 to record a sack in this game. The Chiefs have been very good at protecting Mahomes in the postseason. It's a big reason why this football team has been better against Buffalo and against the Miami Dolphins. But Miami, to me, didn't have the pass rushers or the defensive front to have success. Then on the flip side, Buffalo banged up. That was probably the better performance from the offensive line considering the road atmosphere. But do you trust this O-line to hold up? Maybe it's not the tackles this go around, but are you confident that Nick Allegretti, if he starts, can hold up against a player that had 13 and a half sacks? I think it's worth a flyer at plus money for Madubuike to get a sack. As I said, 13 sacks on the season. Baltimore tops in the league with 60 sacks in the regular season, and they only blitzed at the 8th lowest rate. So they don't have to blitz to manufacture the sacks or anything like that. And Madubuike has been phenomenal. So I do like that plus money bet if we're looking on the Baltimore Ravens side of things. And then 2 with Lamar Jackson. We know the story with Lamar. Sensational, going to be the MVP this season. His mobility. Is Willie Gay Jr. not playing? Is he playing? Is he going to be the guy that has a chance to spy? I think it's crucial when we look at 2 prop bets. One is the rushing number. I think we've all probably focused our attention if you're into betting. Clearly you are if you're watching this show. And you probably right away checked out the props for rushing for a lot of players, and specifically Lamar Jackson. It's a high number, 64.5, but Josh Allen went into the 70s on this Chiefs defense this past week. Kansas City against Lamar is going to certainly be keyed in on it, but are they going to be successful with doing that? I think if you're betting the Lamar Jackson prop rushing, you're either not betting it, in my opinion, or you're betting the over. I don't know how you could take the under on Lamar Jackson rushing prop in this game. Just a couple numbers to back up a potential over bet for Lamar Jackson. He's gone over that number 6 times, 3 of the last 5 games. And the injury, I've said it probably 7 times already in the first 15 minutes of the show, but Willie Gay Jr., is he playing or not? That's going to dictate, I think, this rushing prop as well. Then Lamar Jackson, anytime touchdown, he's plus money, basically even money, plus 105. Last check before I hopped on the show today over at ESPN Bet. And if you're going out to Hollywood Casino, 6 anytime touchdowns the Chiefs have given up to quarterbacks this year. Now, 2 of them were last week to Josh Allen. So that just gives you a little perspective and some background on where things stand for some prop bets. Chiefs, Ravens getting set to take on each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about this game on the back end of the show and also a couple Goldilocks. But I do want to bring in PJ Glasser from BETQL. We'll see if I can do this properly. I haven't had a guest join me before, so let's give it a shot here. There we go. PJ Glasser from BETQL, host of Send It In. What's going on, PJ? Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, Alex, good to be on with you, man. This is a cool setup. Excited to talk about the game with you.
Yeah, let's do it. We're trying something a little bit different tonight. We got some local college basketball on the air, and I know you're a big college basketball guy. So before we let you go, I definitely want to talk to you about college hoops and futures markets in particular, with some of the local schools. Well, really two in particular. I don't think we're going to be talking futures about the Missouri Tigers on the way that they're playing this year, but maybe KU and K-State in the Big 12. But I just got done going through some prop bets, PJ, for the Ravens and for the Chiefs. And I guess we can start with props, then I'll work backwards towards the spread. What do you make on a couple of these props that are out there right now? Much discussed are Lamar Jackson touchdown, Lamar Jackson rushing. Where are you focusing your attention prop-wise for this game?
Yeah, I think when you look at the Ravens side, you're certainly going to have to look at the rushing props, right? We know how good the Chiefs secondary is. We know how good their corners are, and the way that you attack the Chiefs defense on the ground. And Baltimore throughout the season, they've been very patient with Lamar, right? They haven't tried to run him a whole lot. They've tried to develop him as a passer. But as we saw last week in the divisional round against Houston, Alex, now that it's the playoffs, man, I mean, if you got to run Lamar 12, if you got to run him 15, maybe even 17, 18 times, whatever it takes to get the win, you got to do it. And I think this matchup kind of calls for it. So, a lot of people like the yards with Lamar this week at 63.5, especially with the fact he just ran for over 100. I like his attempts at over 10.5. That's the way that I would attack that. I also like Patrick Mahomes' longest rush over 12.5 yards. I took that last week against Buffalo. I mean, as you know, Mahomes, when we get to the postseason, so many of these quarterbacks, I love betting the rushing props because in the regular season, right, if it's 1st and 10, maybe you just throw it away if it's week 4, if it's week 8. But now that we're in the championship game, I mean, you might run for those 2 or 3 yards to make it 2nd and 7, 2nd and 8. So I like that longest rush for Mahomes. He's gotten that in the 2 playoff games so far against Miami and Buffalo. I also like Mahomes' longest pass attempts over 36.5. The 6 games that Kansas City has lost this year, 5 of those 6 games, Mahomes has thrown for 37 attempts or more. So, Kansas City is going to be in a dogfight, obviously. It should be a great game. It's going to be close. I know he only had to throw 23 times last week against Buffalo. I think he's going to have to throw more this week against the Ravens. So those were some things that stood out to me. I think it's tough to, guess the receiving props in this game because Kyle Hamilton's likely going to be matched up with Kelsey. And I think that'll be a fun matchup. And now with Marlon Humphrey back practicing today, and him and Brandon Stevens will trade off on Rasheed Rice. And then on the other side, obviously with the Kansas City corners, it's tough to pick out like Zay Flowers and Andrews is back. So does that chip in to Likely's progression maybe or some of his production? But the ones that I like are the Lamar rushing attempts and Mahomes passing attempts. That's what jumped out to me.
Talking to PJ Glasser of BETQL, that Mahomes pass attempt number is interesting. I get the thought behind it. My only concern would be, is Baltimore going to have the same success that the Bills did in terms of at least time of possession, right? I mean, they doubled up the Chiefs plays, and that's a huge reason why the pass attempts weren't high this past week. I'm not so sure Baltimore's going to have that same success, but if they do, that would be the only reason why I could see the pass attempt prop not hitting. Otherwise, if the Chiefs even just get that play percentage anywhere close to what the Ravens are going to have, and we don't have that same gap that we were discussing after the Bills game, then yes, I think they're probably going to have to or pass the ball more, which is why I'm shying away from Pacheco's rush attempt prop, where last week I think a lot of people like that over 14.5. It's the same number, but that interior of the defensive line, PJ, I think is going to have some success this go around if Joe Thuney of the Chiefs isn't playing left guard.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be one of the big keys, man, is time of possession. I mean, I think everybody can't wait for this matchup because we get Lamar versus Mahomes. But, I mean, as you know, these defenses might be the 2 best in the NFL, the number 1 and 2 scoring defenses. So whichever one that's the way the Ravens were able to break that game open in the second half. They kind of wore Houston down with the time of possession. And to your point, Kansas City kind of did the same thing against Buffalo. So if either of these teams are able to control the line of scrimmage on both sides and hang on the field, that's going to play a big part in this game because I do expect it to be a lower scoring game. I think it's going to be like a 23-20, 24-20 kind of game.
All right, so you are on the same page there. I was talking about the total to open up the show, 44.5. The total being out there. I just think these two defenses are too good to think this game is getting over that number 1, number 2 scoring defense as you laid out there. What about the spread? Look, I know I'm in Kansas City, and so sometimes, especially when we talk about betting, I got to take the Chiefs mindset and Chiefs fandom out of here a little bit. But for me, even though I look at a healthier Baltimore Ravens team, and they are, there's no doubt, they're the healthier team, much like the Chiefs were the healthier team playing the Bills. It's kind of simple. If I'm getting 3.5 or 4 at some spots, there's two books that I still saw have a 4 out there. With Mahomes on the road as a dog, like to me, he's like Brady in this way, where he's going to find ways to win games or at least keep it close. He doesn't get blown out of football games. It just doesn't happen. I think it's happened 4 times. I'm going to always side with Mahomes getting points. I just am until proven, wrong multiple times. Have been proven wrong in the playoffs, really. So where are you at on the spread?
Yeah, I mean, 9-1-1 ATS as an underdog, right? I mean, it's hard to go against that. For me, Alex, it's a numbers play. I think if you get the Ravens at -3, I like the Ravens at 3. I think if you get them at 4 with Kansas City, I like the Chiefs at 4. And 3.5 to me is probably the right line. And for people who are in the same boat as you, I was that way last week against Buffalo, right? I mean, when 3s were popping up against the Bills, I'm like, if you're going to give me Mahomes +3, like that's an auto play. I think that the Ravens are a better team than Kansas City. I think they're a much better team. I just think that Mahomes is really the big difference to keep this game close. Ravens have the MVP at quarterback. Their defense this season was the first defense that won the Triple Crown. They were first or tied for first in sacks, takeaways, and points per game allowed. And then they have Justin Tucker as their kicker. So all 3 phases, I mean, they're as good as it gets. And you look at how their season has unfolded this year. They've had 11 wins against teams with a winning record who finished 500 or better. 9 of those 11 wins, Alex, were by double digits. So they haven't played the Chiefs yet. It's Mahomes in the playoffs, which just makes it so good. But I would probably, it's a numbers play for me. I think if it's at 3, I like the Ravens. At 4, Kansas City. And 3.5, probably just stay away from me.
All right, let's go to the NFC for a little bit here, where we see the 7 is pretty much the consensus line that's out there. I caught some of your show or a clip of it on a BETQL earlier today. Send it in. You were talking about the Niners being 7-point favorites against the Lions and wondering injury news in that game, which is something we have to key in on and where things stand with Deebo Samuel. At 7, is that a number which you feel confident taking the Detroit Lions? Because I think if you can buy the hook and get to 7.5, you can talk me into backing the Lions in this game.
Right. And see, that's what I'm interested with how this game plays out. We get closer to Sunday. Do we get 7.5? I don't think we do. I think if you like the Lions right now, Alex, the way that the lines are, 7s across the board, I think that's with the anticipation that Deebo is going to play. I think him playing is built into the line. So if you like San Francisco, I don't think there's any rush. I don't think there's going to be 7.5s that pop up. I think you wait and see if Deebo doesn't play, because then the line's going to drop down to 6.5 or maybe even 6. And that's what I'm doing, because I really think Deebo is that important to this game. I'm leaning towards San Francisco. But man, until I know that he's out there and he's playing, I can't bet the game, because San Francisco with him and without him, it's just like it's night and day watching them play on offense.
A lot has been made of the Lions not playing outdoors for a couple months, really. And normally I would say, okay, that's interesting. Let me take a look at that. How does that impact Jared Goff and all that? But then you look at the weather, PJ, and it's like 70 degrees and sunny in Santa Clara on Sunday evening. So does that play into your thought process at all? I was trying to pull up a couple props for Jared Goff. I see his passing total sitting at over under 255.5, which is lower than I believe any of the prior playoff games for him. Now he's playing a better team, but still his other numbers were 265, 261. It's at 255.5. How much does that go into your thought process, if any?
I don't think as the weather does as much, Alex, as does the natural grass in San Francisco, right? Like, how many times do we see a bunch of these dome teams and then they go outside, Dallas, the Saints, right? Like, those are the kind of teams we think of when they play on natural grass. It's sometimes different for them. And Jared Goff's a California kid. He went to the University of Cal in Berkeley. So obviously that's the stuff he grew up with. It's going to be beautiful. So the weather really doesn't play a factor for me. If anything, it's the footing. But I think Detroit's going to be fine. I think they're going to be ready to go. I think this is such a tough game to handicap, because it's really what you struggle with in sports betting, right? Like, it's the recency bias. For me, going into the San Francisco-Green Bay game last week, I liked the Niners -9.5. I just thought there was too much recency bias with Green Bay. I thought that game was more about Dallas than it was about the Packers, and I was proven wrong. Green Bay played great. Love played great. Their defense hung around. But then we face that same kind of thing this week with San Francisco. It's like, are we going to forget about the team that we saw for like the whole season, especially when they played the NFC? Or are they going to struggle once again? Is it going to be Shanahan in the playoffs? Is Purdy going to look a little bit shaky for much of the game? So, again, this is just a game where there's too much unknown for me. I do like San Francisco to win, but I could certainly see Detroit covering the number. But them playing outside, not a factor for me.
This is That Betting Show on 610 Sports Radio, presented by Hollywood Casino. Tonight, not on 610 Sports Radio due to Kansas State basketball pregame coverage, and then the Wildcats taking on Iowa State up in Ames. So that's why we're doing this video-only stream. Appreciate some of you maybe checking out the show for the first time. We air it every Wednesday night from 7 to 8 on 610, and we'll be back on 610 next Wednesday. And hopefully talking about the Chiefs getting set for the Super Bowl, but appreciate PJ Glasser of BETQL, host of Send It In, joining me just for a couple more minutes here. Lastly, on the NFL, before I do want to get your college basketball perspective, when you look at some of the futures market, and obviously we're just simply talking about the Super Bowl market at this point in time, and I guess you can bet on some Super Bowl MVPs, but some look-ahead lines. Are any of the look-ahead lines juicy enough for you to consider actually making a bet ahead of time? For those listening or watching, just to fill you in, the look-ahead line would have the Chiefs as a 3-point dog to the 49ers. It would have the Chiefs as a 3.5-point favorite if they were to take on the Lions.
Yeah, I think the two AFC teams against San Francisco. Alex, I don't know how you feel, but I think the winner of Chiefs-Ravens is winning the Super Bowl. And
really?
Right,
okay.
I do. I think the winner of that game is winning the Super Bowl, regardless of who it is. So I think that right now San Francisco would be favored against both teams. They'd probably be like -1, 1.5 against Baltimore. And then, like you said, they'd be 3 against Kansas City. So I think whoever you like to win on Sunday, I would go ahead and take that current line for the Super Bowl. It's going to be interesting. If the Ravens win and they cover the spread against Kansas City, I'm interested to see if that game's a pick-em, because San Francisco is going to open up as the favorite. And then if the Chiefs beat Baltimore and, they beat the Bills as 3-point dogs, they beat the Ravens as 3.5, 4-point dogs, like, are they really going to give us another key number with the Chiefs headed into the Super Bowl? So I think there's value on both of those teams if they end up winning the game.
I would love it if you want to keep giving me Mahomes as a dog getting 3.5 on the road all playoff long, and I guess a neutral side in the Super Bowl. I will keep on betting it. Like, I truly, and I know I'm in Kansas City, but I truly believe that we're finding out more and more and more that he, much like Brady, can carry teams that have no business being in an AFC title game maybe this year or a Super Bowl. There were plenty of years we all watched and probably hated it, then saw Brady and like, how the heck is this guy in another Super Bowl? And I feel like that's where we're headed. Because if we just go through roster and injury and all this, like, no, the Ravens should win this game on Sunday. Like, they should absolutely win it. But man, like, how do you factor Patrick Mahomes into this equation? And so I hear you on that. I did think it was interesting to see the particular line with the Lions-Ravens matchup, where the Ravens would be 4.5-point favorites against the Detroit Lions. And you're right, if the Ravens were to cover against the Chiefs, like, does that go up, or do we see it actually go down? I think there'd be plenty of people that would take the Detroit Lions in the Super Bowl just because they're all going to be rooting for the Lions. Like, whether if the Lions beat the Niners and they're playing the Chiefs or the Ravens, the public's going to be on the Lions, right?
Oh, that'll be America's team. There's no question. And if the Ravens make the Super Bowl, what's going to make that game so interesting, especially from a betting perspective, we've seen the Ravens play both teams, and we've seen them dominate both teams. They beat the Lions 38-6 earlier in the year. And then obviously on Christmas Day, they beat San Francisco, forced 5 interceptions. And then the Chiefs and Lions played all the way back in week 1. Chiefs and the Niners played in the Super Bowl a couple years back. So any kind of matchup we get is going to be really fascinating. You're right, though, about the Chiefs. I mean, this narrative that, maybe this year's team isn't as good as the others. Like, there's so many similarities to the Brady New England teams, like you said, right? Like, those Patriots teams didn't have the best weapons, but they had a dominant defense and they had Brady. And that's what this Chiefs team kind of reminds me of. Alex, I saw the stat that I think the last 6 games that the Chiefs have played, they've given up 7 points or fewer in the second half, which I think is another really interesting angle in this game on Sunday, right? If it's like maybe 17-14 at halftime, or it's 17-13, similar to what we saw in the Chiefs-Bills game, I think both teams are going to make adjustments. Ravens didn't give up any points to Stroud and the Texans in the second half. Chiefs gave up 7 points. Both teams really adjust in the second half. So, kind of look and see how the first half goes. And I think maybe you get a good chance to get a good second half under number.
All right, before I let PJ Glasser get out of here from BetQL, real quick college basketball thought. I'm sure you have some futures tickets out there, but how are you feeling about the futures market right now, college basketball? We know here locally, mentioned K-State Hoops is coming up against Iowa State. They're actually 8.5-point underdogs. We know KU's coming off a win last night, but they've been rocky here recently. How do you feel about the Big 12 and thoughts on either KU or K-State come tournament time?
Yeah, I mean, the Big 12 top to bottom is the best league. I felt it was that way last year, and then they bring in all these teams, Cincinnati and BYU, and all these teams are competitive. And as you know, Kansas has lost to a couple of them. They've lost to UCF on the road. I like K-State tonight, actually, plus the 8.5 against Iowa State. I like what Jerome Tang did in the portal, getting, Tyler Perry from North Texas and Arthur Kaluma. They're a better defensive team this year. I think they can keep that game close. As for the futures market for both teams, I'm really not high on either. I think Kansas might have the best starting five in college basketball. But, man, when you get them out of Lawrence and you get them on a neutral floor, and if they get into foul trouble and they have to rely on some of their depth, that's where I kind of get nervous about them. And K-State, same kind of thing. I think they could be very competitive. I think if they're like a 7 or 8 seed in the tournament, depending on their draw, what kind of 1 or 2 seed they get, they could give them some issues. They obviously have the experience going to the Elite Eight last year. But the Big 12, to me, Houston is the team that I like best long term. I think Kelvin Sampson's the best coach in the sport. Like, just look at what he's done with LJ Cryer, who came over from Baylor, and the defender that he has turned him into. You know what kind of defense you're going to get in, night out from Houston. If their offense just somewhat is able to stay consistent throughout the tournament, I think they're going to be tough to beat. So I like Houston the best long-term. Kansas State kind of worry me. Kansas with their depth and Kansas State, I just don't know if they have enough firepower going in the tournament.
If you're wondering odds markets, by the way, for the national title, Houston 10-1, Purdue's the favorite at plus 750, Connecticut 10-1, KU all the way down at 23-1 right now to win the national title. PJ Glasser of BetQL, appreciate you coming on with me, man.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. Appreciate it.
That's PJ Glasser. You can check him out on Send It In. And does a great job for BetQL. He's been on with us a couple different times. Alex Gold here from 610. You guys probably know me from Cody and Gold along with Cody Tapp. Midday show, 10 to 2 on 610. Doing a little different show tonight. That betting show normally on Wednesday nights from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on 610 Sports Radio. But K-State Hoops getting started in about a half hour, and that's why I'm trying something a little bit different tonight. And appreciate Hollywood Casino for sponsoring the show. And if you guys haven't been out to Hollywood Casino, they got a brand new sports book. Maybe you went to the temporary setup when sports betting launched in the state of Kansas, but it is a whole new sports book. It is what you imagine a sports book to fully be. Leather couches, over 50 screens if you include how they can divide up this TV wall. It's got a full bar in there. You should check it out. This is obviously another great weekend for it, and cannot wait for March Madness when you're going to have all these different games going on. But PJ said he likes the Wildcats to cover against Iowa State tonight. I'm on the under for the game, under 135.5 for K-State and Iowa State coming up in just about 20 minutes or so. Let's wrap things up here. We always end the show, if you listen to it, with Goldilocks. We'll run through these. A lot of them are going to be, if you missed the beginning of this show, some bets that I liked. As I mentioned, I will go ahead and buy the half point for the Detroit Lions, though. I will take Detroit plus the 7.5, as PJ and I were talking about. I do like the Lions to cover the 7.5. The 49ers look a lot more vulnerable. We all thought, including myself, for many, many weeks this season, that they were clearly the best team in football, that they're only could be stopped by injury. Well, Deebo Samuel is hurt right now. We'll see his status as the week goes on. I think he probably plays, but let's check on that. And then, does Christian McCaffrey get banged up in game like he's been shaken up a few times? I think the Detroit Lions, that offense will travel. I expect them to go in there with, frankly, nothing to lose added to. All the pressure is on the 49ers. So maybe the Niners end up winning that game, but I'll take the Lions plus the 7.5. I'll buy the hook and take the Lions 7.5. That's one of my Goldilocks. And then let's go to the Chiefs and Ravens game, as we started the show with a couple props. And one, before we get to the props, would just be the total. I love the under for the game, 44.5. If we're taking a look at the total, maybe you find a 45 out there, and it's just how good these defenses are. These are the two best defenses in football. The stat that everybody keeps referencing about this Chiefs defense second half, since week 14, 7 points is the most they have given up in the second half. So even if you get them, you better get them in the first half, because Steve Spagnuolo has been better than anybody at adjusting in the second half, and that's a credit to him. Chris Jones turns it up a notch in the second half. We saw that play out against the Buffalo Bills, and it's why, from a betting perspective this year, the trend that I think after week 9 I mentioned on that betting show was, hey, I'm gonna follow this trend the rest of the way, and we'll win and we'll lose together. We've won a lot more than lose. I can promise you that on the trend, and that is second half unders and fourth quarter unders. I believe it ended up at 15-2 second half unders, something like that this year. It was extremely profitable bet. Second half unders on the Chiefs, so look for that opportunity in this game as well against Baltimore. But the official Goldie Lock under 44.5. And then 2 prop bets out of the ones we mentioned that I do want to lock in, over 86.5 rushing/receiving yards for Isaiah Pacheco. Combination there. Look, if he wants to get all 86.5 on the ground, I think that's great news for Kansas City. But we don't even need that from a betting perspective. He's gone over this 6 of his past 7 games. We'll stay away from the rushing attempt prop this week. And then the last prop that I'll go with as a Goldie Lock, let's go ahead and go on the other side with the Ravens here. I think it's plus money still at plus 150. Joe Thuney may not play at left guard. It might be Nick Allegretti. And while he's a vet, while he knows this system, he's not an all-pro, right? I mean, that's just how good Joe Thuney is. So I think there's an opportunity to take a sack prop for the Baltimore Ravens. Justin Matabuke, plus 150. He's got 13 sacks on the season. And with Allegretti filling in, I think that's an opportunity in an area we can attack. So I appreciate some of you checking out the show for the very first time. If you enjoyed it, I appreciate that. Hit me up on Twitter at Alex Gold, and we'll be live on 610 next Wednesday night, 7 to 8. That's when we're normally on. Maybe, who knows? Maybe we'll do this video component every week going forward. And so I appreciate that. Let me know what you guys thought. Some advice. Thanks to PJ Glasser for joining me from BETQL. So send me those tickets and your bets for tonight, for the rest of the weekend. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow morning, 10 to 2 on 610 Sports Radio.